of the Bhopal Art and Literature Festival, organized by the Society for Culture and Environment. It is an immense pleasure and honor to be a part of such an auspicious and glorified event. So our first session, let us begin with the discussion of the book Birding in India by our chief guest, Dr. Satish Pande, and he will be in conversation with Mr. Kaustubh Rishi and Mr. Abhilash Khandekar. I would request all of you to please step up on the stage so that we can begin the discussion. Dr. Satish Pande. He is the director of ELA Foundation and ELA Transit Treatment Center for Wild Animals, chief editor of the ELA Journal of Forestry and Wildlife. He is an author, researcher, interventional radiologist. He has 70 plus scientific papers, 40 plus books, several popular publications. He has organized 3 of India's first conferences: Raptor Conference, Wildlife Hazard Management in Aviation, which was organized in the year 2015, and World Owl Conference, which was organized in 2019. He has been endowed with several national and international conservation awards, including the RBS Green Warrior Award, World Owl Hall of Fame Award. Moving on, Mr. Kaustubh Rishi. He is a young bird watcher from the city of Indore. And our third discussant, that is Mr. Abhilash Khandekar, he is an environmentalist and founder of the Nature Volunteers. Now over to you, gentlemen, to begin the discussion.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to have Dr. Satish Pande, my bird guru, coming all the way from Pune to Bhopal for this Lit Fest. And he's an extraordinary personality. Besides being a medicine doctor, he is also an internationally acclaimed bird scientist and ornithologist. He heads the ELA Foundation in Bombay, and I have lost the count of Pune, and I have lost count of the books that he has written on birds and many other wildlife. But basically, he's an expert on large number of species that are found not only in India, also outside. He also organizes International Owl Festival in Pune. Among, like, you know that there are specializations in nature conservation and wildlife. Some people are focusing on tiger conservation, some people are focusing on lions, some people. So he is a person who is focusing among the birds also to some of the raptor species and many other species. So I welcome him here on behalf of the Bhopal Literature Festival and also as his old friend, and he has been very supportive. We have been organizing ornithology certificate courses in Indore with the Nature Volunteers and ELA Foundation, and Dr. Pandey's efforts are to produce more and more ornithologists, more and more nature lovers. So welcome to you, sir.
Thank you very much.
And over to Kaustubh. Kaustubh is a young IT professional and a bird enthusiast. They both together, I wake up late in the night, late in the morning, and they both woke up at around 5:30 and went birding at 6 o'clock in Bhopal. So welcome to Bhopal. You are from Indore and he's from Pune. Over to you, Kaustubh.
Thank you, Pandey sir, and thank you, Abhilash sir, for being here with us. So being a young birder, my journey started 15 years back. And so compared to Pandey sir's experience, it's 1/3 of it. Pandey sir has more than 45 years of experience in birding and documenting birds and writing about them. So it's a great pleasure for us to have Pandey sir here on the floor with us.
Thank
and we would like to start the conversation with Abhilash sir taking the mic and starting it with on the note.
So the topic is birding in India, which is a very vast topic. But I would like to know from Dr. Pandey what it all means that when you go out for birding, what is the basics of birdings, and there are not large number of people who are now putting different species of birds on Twitters and social media, and at times they don't know the species, but we are very happy that the number of bird watchers is growing across the country. But how to make them serious bird watchers and convert them into real ornithologists? So I would like to know everything about birding in India.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, and I take this opportunity to thank the organizers to call me here and share some of my views with you. I would like to say that birding is not just going out and looking at birds. You know, whatever action that you do, I think unless there is a deep philosophical meaning behind what you do, there is no point in doing things. So whenever we look at nature, because birds are a part of nature, and what happens is the birds sing, birds are beautiful, and birds fly. And that flight of birds, you know, it epitomizes the spirit of freedom that is there in every human heart. And when you see a bird fly, you fly with it, you know. So that is the kind of thing I look at birds like. Now, birds are a part of nature. So when you look at nature, what human beings have been doing so far, mostly are they look at nature in a utilitarian perspective. So they would either go out and look at birds in a, you know, sort of a commodity. So somebody goes out and does photography. Somebody goes out and, you know, they start breeding birds, and we have got so many stories where in Sindh, in Pakistan, and in the medieval times, during the Renaissance, pre-Renaissance times, you know, all these ladies from Europe, they used to wear those aigrettes, that is of feathers in their caps. And that one single cap feather, you know, it was, you know, sort of running an industry. And that industry was few tons of bird feathers were exported from Pakistan and India to the entire European continent. And what happened therefore is many of these aigrettes, you know, they have these breeding feathers coming out during the breeding time, you know, beautiful feathers, and those entire populations got decimated. So that is one way. So economic use is another use. So one is, and then sometimes, you know, people look at aesthetic value of birds. There are scientists who look at birds in a, you know, a vehicle for doing research. So beyond that, what I would like to say is one has to try to appreciate the inherent value of birds. One has to appreciate the inherent value in nature. And unless you appreciate the inherent value in nature, you know, nothing happens. Otherwise, what happens is, you know, it's like a man is a super killer, but with a conscience. Now, that is a, you know, a sort of a very contrasting situation. A super killer doing super killing, using modern technology, and has a conscience. Now, here is something where if you try to stimulate that conscience, and birds are one of the very easy vehicles for stimulating that conscience. And if man starts behaving properly, then he will become one of the most benevolent creatures on the earth. Today he is not. So that is why I think birding is very, very important. So it is a, you know, it is a sort of a vehicle for looking at nature. And what are the various values that we see in nature by using birds? And those values are like, you know, there is a value for life. So that is something I think we have to learn from birds. Then there is an intrinsic value of cultural value is there. There is a religious value which is associated. There is a dialectic value which is associated. I went to Mongolia. You know, I had gone to Mongolia for a conference on raptors. They had called me. And when I went there, I was talking to one of these Mongolian tribals. And I asked him, what do you do when you feel, you know, dejected, when you're not happy? And he says, now Mongolia is a country which is a steppe country. You know, for thousands of kilometers there are just steppes and, you know, no mountains. So what he says, if I get dejected, you know, we think about the mountains. We think about the mountains. You know, they don't see them because there are no mountains. There are just those nunataks. And these nunataks are just 20 feet hills. And on that hill, you know, there is a golden eagle breeding, there is a steppe eagle breeding, there is a king vulture breeding, there are sacker falcons breeding, and so on, you know, and vultures and eagles are breeding on the ground. And this person tells me, I think of the mountains, and then I think I'm not happy, but see how big the mountain is. And when I look at the mountain and I go up, and I look at the sky, and then I suddenly realize how small I am. And if I am so small, I am such
So
a small
nice.
element in this large, you know, scheme of nature, then I suddenly feel if I am so small, I am a part of this. You know, you are carving culture not in nature, you know, you are doing it out of nature. You know, so that is something, you know, there are two different ways of looking at things. So when he says, if I wanted to have horse meat today and I didn't get that horse meat, I say, so it's such a small thing, I just say like that, I just say, oh, it's no problem, and then I become happy again, and then I start working. So that sense of proportion is something which nature teaches you beyond any other guru. So I
You
think
mean
that
to say the birds teach us more?
if you look at birds as vehicles of connecting with nature, because in nature there is nothing individual, there is nothing separate, everything is linked with each other. So that sense of belonging, that sense of interconnectedness, and that sense of diversity which tells you about the unity of a creation is something I would always like to look at birds in this perspective. There is a much easier way of looking at birds, and that perspective is you look at the bird and say, oh, how beautiful it is, and I take out a camera, and I got so many friends now. Abhilash is here, it doesn't have a camera, he would say, I am wasting my time with a camera because I'm just looking at the camera, I'm not looking at nature. So that is the perspective, so that is what I feel. You have to keep on, evolving. And no better vehicle than birds because of all these three attributes: singing, colorful, and flight. So I think that is very
How
important.
many bird species are found in India?
In India, there are about 1,300 species, because many of these previous subspecies or races are now converted into or
Separate
given a
species.
separate status of a species. But 1150 to 1,300 is a sort of a thing. Plus, I would say that there are some species of birds still waiting to be discovered in India. I had gone to the Narcondam Island. Narcondam Island is one of the northernmost islands of Andaman and Nicobar groups. And when we went to the Narcondam Island, we had a very brief amount of time because we did this survey with the Indian Navy and the Indian Coast Guard. And we wanted to go there and look at the Narcondam hornbills. Because what was happening at that time, now this was about maybe 12 years back. And at that time, what was the news was, Narcondam being the northernmost island of India, there were all these refugees from Myanmar who would come there and stay in Narcondam, and therefore there was a police post which was created there such that these refugees would not come to Narcondam. Now this Narcondam island is an island size of maybe your Shamla Hills, and on that island there is a beautiful bird called the Narcondam hornbill. And this Narcondam hornbill is seen nowhere else in the world except on the Narcondam island. And this police post which was there, which was supposed to be taking care of refugees, they used to get so bored because they were all given chicken to eat. So they would go out in the hill and shoot a Narcondam hornbill, one or two, and start eating them. And they did not even know that the Narcondam hornbill is one of the smallest population birds in the entire world. So when this started coming into the papers and people started talking about them, and then there were these workshops for the police which were held, and eventually it stopped. So at that time we had gone for the Narcondam hornbill, and there what happens is, these are the kinds of places where if you are trying to do some kind of conservation, some kind of serious work on birds, because birding, I again think that birding should be not just for individual gratification, because birding is, in our opinion, the first step towards doing something serious. So whenever we want to do conservation, we think about species. Now see, here is something I think it is very important. If you have to look at a species is made of multiple individuals. Now for the survival of species, now see what is the paradox here. For the survival of a species, breeding of multiple individuals is necessary, because unless they breed, there will be no further recruitment and the species will not survive. But for the survival of an individual, breeding is not important. Because even if I don't breed, even if I don't have children, I'm still there. So this is a kind of a paradox. Now you have to look at these kinds of things when you are doing conservation. So when you want to do birding, you have to keep so many things in mind. Why am I doing it? That is my first question I asked anybody. So whenever we have, birders who come to us and, now as Kaustubh said there's Facebook and Instagram and all those things, and then people keep on, putting these pictures.
I'll interrupt you just like because it happened in Pune about a year or maybe 2 years ago. A small little bird came from somewhere. I'll tell the name of the species, and hundreds of photographers with huge cameras. Amur Falcon. Amur Falcon was sitting on a stone, and hundreds of Mercedes and all top SUVs and people were lined up, and there were at least I could count in that photograph. There were 62 photographers lying on the ground just to capture that. So that when I asked you okay, what happened, this kind of birding is okay?
It is absolutely not right. And so we went, because this particular thing was in the premises of Tata Power Company. And we, at ILA Foundation, we run a ornithology course. That is the only such interactive course going on for the last 18 years in the country. And just we finished the last batch 2 weeks back. So one of the first participants of our course was Mr. Vivek Vishwasrao. Now he is the chief of biodiversity. When he came to know about these things, he immediately took steps. A trench was dug such that the vehicles would not go. But then, there is such a amount of political pressure. So what happens is, again we come to this birding in India is because publications. Unless we have got a enlightened population, we will never have a responsible birding. Now this is what you said is a irresponsible birding. Now when the vehicles at least stopped, 90% of the thing stopped, you had to walk a very long distance to look at the Amur falcon, and then they made a restriction, like you have to have at least 100 meters distance between the Amur falcon, because people say we want to do birding, we want to take photographs, and we want to have this kind of documentation. So the thing again here is, why do you want to have a photograph? There are people who tell me, I want to go to the South Pole and have a look at the penguins. Well, they are there. Again, we talk about the intrinsic value. The penguins are there. Even if we don't study them at the moment, they are still there. But hundreds and hundreds of people start going to the South Pole, get into large boats, have lots of oil spills, and one of the major sources of oxygen which is coming on the earth today is not from trees. You may be aware. It is coming from that zone of Antarctic confluence, from where millions and millions of phytoplanktons are producing oxygen. So 90% of the oxygen that comes to the earth for us to breathe is coming from those microscopic phytoplanktons. And we have no business to go there and just have a look at the penguins just because I want to have a photograph. So the point here is, why do you want to have a photograph? What is the logical use that you are going to do with this photography? And here we come to this important workshop, why I am here, why I am called, because we are doing all these things, because we feel that this documentation has to reach and go back to the public domain in a easy to understand manner. So today, lots of these funding agencies like...
I would like to show you here somebody can take the photograph of this. This is Birds of Indore, which we brought out about 2 years ago, and with the help of Dr. Pandey, and he was there for the release of the book, and he guided us onto there are about 267 species of indoor birds in this book, and there are very many books. This is our second or third book, but Pandeyji he has written the foreword in this book, and he will talk about this and many other books. But the importance of documentation.
So we have to document. Now, when Abhilash ji called me, I am a very small man, and I know what a personality Abhilash ji is. Just a great man. About birds, and not about bird watchers. So when we talk about birds, and when we look at these kinds of books, as I was telling, now there is one of these funding agencies previously called the Darwin Fund. Now this Darwin Fund used to give funding for research on taxonomy, hardcore taxonomy, and they would be giving, millions of dollars. They changed their policy about 15 years back, saying that unless your research goes back to the people and that research is told to them in a easy to understand manner, in the form of publications, in the form of workshops, in whatever form, and unless that kind of a research, you have to show a potential for socio-economic uplifting of the society, where the taxa comes from, and you use that taxa, and then you go back to the society and enlighten them. Because just finding 100 new species and just putting them and publishing them in the scientific journals, it is important, but it is not enough. So now what they do is they have asked scientists to go back to the public and convey their research to the public in a manner which they will understand, because conservation is very, very important. And what is conservation? Conservation is important because, if it is not conserved, it goes to extinction. And when you talk about extinction, you wipe out the essence and not just the existence. I know this is very, very important. So just, you kill the soul as well as the body. So when we are talking about publications, I think we don't consider ourselves to be hardcore scientists. We do science, yes. But I think the most important job of doing things is come out with guides, come out with simple things. And I will tell you, even when we talk about Indian ornithology, Alan Hume, who is called the Pope, into inverted commas, actually the father of Indian ornithology, he was the British officer, he was the co-founder of the Indian National Congress, and Alan Hume published a journal called Stray Feathers for 16 years non-stop, based on which another person, see, Alan Hume was not a scientific ornithologist. Another person who was inspired was T.C. Sheridan. So Major T.C. Sheridan was a colonel in the Indian Army at that time from of the British Army. He wrote a book called Fauna of India series, The Birds of India. That is in 3 volumes. And look at the dedication. What I'm trying to come to a point is, much of ornithology in not only India but across the world has been done by amateurs. And T.C. Sheridan, when he retired, he had a small pension. And all that pension that he had, he approached the British government saying that I want to publish this Birds of India 3 volumes. And they said, no, we will not be able to, fund. He spent the entire amount of his pension and published these 3 volumes, which are forming the basis on which later the great man Dr. Salim Ali and Dylan Ripley, who was then the curator of the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. And he has written in his book that all the work that has been published here is largely based on the observations of Alan Hume and T.C. Sheridan. So those were the kinds of things. So I think again here I am suddenly reminded of E.C. Stuart Baker. E.C. Stuart Baker, he wrote a book on nidification of the birds of the Indian subcontinent. What is nidification? Nidification is their breeding habits. And he did a atlas of eggs of various birds of India. Every bird, you have a photograph of the egg. That was done by E.C. Stuart Baker. When he was doing that work, his colleagues at that time used to tease him, saying, you are a useless man, you are looking at birds, and what are you doing? You are spending time, Until up to 30 years, you remember, when we used to go out birding, people used to say that you don't have any work, and that is like, kuch bhi kar rahe.
A very senior IS officer in Indore asked me, kya yaar, pakshi bacha ke kya karoge? 20 saal pehle. So this is the understanding of birding. So therefore we want you to, throw light on this.
And
So
I went,
Kaustubh would like to ask you something.
Pandey sir, on the same note, we have seen a lot of documentation at national level, international level. Books has been published for Birds of India, Subcontinent. What is the importance of publication at the local level? For example, Birds of Indore, Birds of Bhopal. So how important those are?
Yes.
And then coming generations, what they can use these kind of documentations and build upon that.
This is a very important question. Before I start answering that, E.C. Stuart Baker, in his book, has quoted, after he was troubled by people, from Aristotle. And Aristotle has said, bird watching is a hobby, is a worthy occupation of an enlightened mind. That is what Aristotle has said. bird watching is a worthy occupation of an enlightened mind. So that is something. So now, when we talk about, so that is a very popular question that people ask. Like now there is already Birds of India, 10 volumes by Salim Ali Sahib and Dylan Ripley, Grimmett and Inskip, they have got their volumes on birds. Kazmerzak has got a book on birds. Bikram Grewal, who was the first person to, sort of produce the first photographic guide on the birds of, he did it on Birds of India actually, but it was very, not all the birds were there, but he was a very fantastic person and he said that. And when I looked at that book, I felt that I should do a book and that should be a photographic guide. And then we did this book called Birds of Western Ghats, Konkan and Malabar. Now, when we talk about local publications, here we have got Birds of Indore. Now, this book is very important. Why? Because conservation can happen only and only if there is public participation. And without public participation, now there are enough laws, there are enough number of judiciary equipments, but conservation is not happening. When does it happen? When Abhilash writes a book on Birds of Indore, all these people who are working in Indore and happy and looking at conservation, and you have got Bhalu Monde, Ajay Gadikar and Pramar Maurya who have written this book. Every person from that place has a sense of ownership. They look at these beautiful pictures and they say, I never knew that the white-eyed buzzard, if there is a picture of the white-eyed buzzard here. When I take a white-eyed buzzard in my hand, I got the shock of my life when I got the white-eyed buzzard first time in my hand, because the white color of the iris of the white-eyed buzzard is whiter and more immaculate than any of the Chinese pottery. You just get stunned. So that is the kind of thing which can come out through photographs. So when you have a photographic guide, people think, well, I am a person, this is my bird, I don't really bother if something happens there in Ukraine. Are we bothered? Something happens there in Africa for a secretary bird, I feel, oh, that's so bad. But something happens in Indore, something happens in Maharashtra on a species of a bird like a florican, and then a florican is seen, and then there is a newspaper thing saying that the florican is getting disturbed, or the Amur falcons are coming from Amur land in China, and they stay in Nagaland, and then they are briefly coming to Lonavala, and then there is such a hue and cry, and people say, this is our bird, it is our responsibility. I want that bird to go safely to Africa, go there, eat there well, go back to Amurland. So that is the purpose. I think that is the purpose of local birds.
What you said is absolutely right, sir, because we did one book on birds of Sirpur long back.
Yes.
So now when we compare it with the number of species on that lake, we could easily make out that what we have lost and what we have gained. So there are a lot of new species being added and some of them are now not found. So this is a kind of a litmus test for that place as well, and how good it is being conserved and what all next step efforts are required.
Yeah. Now, before, I think we are run out of time, is it? Okay. So before I conclude, I think he asked another important question.
I also wanted to ask, throw light on the migration of
Yes.
That's a very important issue.
Yeah.
So after you,
So the
reply
part
to
of this answer will be about migration. Beyond birding. So what I said initially is birding is just the first step of appreciating nature. Today, if you talk about applied ornithology, now there are several things in applied ornithology. I have done, now there is a thing called airport ornithology. What is airport ornithology? There is wildlife hazard management at the airport, such that a trained pilot who has spent about 30 years of his life in learning how to fly, and an aircraft which is very expensive and which is, having about 300 people sitting inside, and every life is invaluable, and a bird hits the aircraft and there is such a loss, the pilot dies, the aircraft is gone, the people die. There is this specialization called airport ornithology. ILA Foundation, my organization, we had been advising the Chhatrapati Shivaji International Airport, for 2 years. And we made a lot of changes there such that the airport there would be safer. We are also had an opportunity to interact with naval airports and, try to make them safe. So airport ornithology is one thing which is coming up as a big branch. wind farm and solar panel ornithology. That is another thing. Wind farm ornithology is a big subject. I am happy to say that we have been working on wind farm ornithology ourselves. I have got publications of papers, and I was also invited by the Ministry of Environment and Forest to advise and to formulate certain things about wind farm ornithology. Then there is a very, very important thing called zoonosis. Now these zoonotic diseases, now we had this very recently, we are getting COVID. But before that we had this bird flu. And you must have already read that in America we had an outbreak of bird flu in 6 states very recently, just last month. So bird flu, so all these zoonotic diseases, that is a very important aspect of ornithology because many birds carry this bird flu virus. And there is a lot of research. I am again happy to say that I have been coming to Bhopal earlier to visit the high security animal disease security laboratory because we were working with the National Institute of Virology for almost 16 years, and we did survey of all the migratory birds and the wild birds to see which of the birds were infected by bird flu. So there we have got papers. Then there is another important aspect of ornithology called pollution ornithology. And what is this? Now this is something which is close to everybody's heart. It has to be close because it concerns all of us. One of my PhD students, I've given him a topic of looking at all the birds that we find on the road, roadside kills. So we pick up those birds, look at the birds, and then we dissect them, take out the organs, do histopathology, and send the liver for contaminants. And I will tell you with a very sad, sort of a expression that every bird that we have found, which has been found dead, has lots of pesticide residues. Now these are DDT, DDE, Eldrin, there are 36 residues. So our hypothesis was any bird would take natural care to avoid a collision because nobody wants to die. But why is he colliding? The point here is there has to be some sort of a underlying neuromuscular incoordination, and if that neuromuscular incoordination is there, it comes from these organochlorine and organophosphorus residues. So that is something that we are finding. So today, the president of the Indian Medical Association of Maharashtra, he has asked me to talk to doctors and come out with all this data and at least educate the doctors and the farmers about these kinds of things.
Because we are eating the same food that those birds are eating. So it is
cancer of colon, cancer of stomach, cancer of ovaries, they're all on the rise because of these large amount of pesticides that we are consuming. Birds are telling us, are we listening? Are we observing? Or are we just doing photography and forgetting about it? And the last question that Abhilash asked me is technology in ornithology. And that technology in ornithology is used most widely for the study of movements of birds. And here we come across the most wonderful phenomenon which happens on Mother Earth. And that phenomenon is the phenomenon of bird migration. And just to understand bird migration, and I had been lucky to go to Taiwan. Taiwan is a natural bottleneck from where all the birds from Russia and China bottleneck at that isthmus of Taiwan. And from there, it's called Kenting. And from there, they all spread out. So you sit at Kenting, you will see literally millions of birds flying on your head. You go to Eilat in Israel, where I had been, and you go to Bosporus in Middle East, you go to Thailand, there are places there. Black bazas, 10,000 black bazas flying over your head at a height of 20 feet. That is something which is fantastic. But if you want to understand that, you have to have technology. And now we have got transmitters. So we are also working on transmitters. We are putting rings on birds. We are tagging birds. The last anecdote I will tell you is about vultures. Now we are doing a lot of work on vulture conservation with the Maharashtra Forest Department in Pune. When we wanted to we found out that the vultures are dying amongst many other things, largely because they don't get sufficient food to eat. So they are starving. So diclofenac was an earlier problem which was stopped by the government of India. That is what we believe. Yes. No. The point is because diclofenac is not allowed in veterinary practice now.
But it is available in the market.
It
we are
is
told.
available in the market in 2 ml ampules. So if you have to inject a cattle, you have to have a dose of about 50 ml. So no, and the veterinary doctors have also been significantly sensitized.
Sensitized, correct.
But now here, so when we found out that vultures are dying because of starvation, the answer was you have to feed them. So if you want to feed them, this concept was done in South Africa, where they started vulture restaurants. So we have vulture restaurants in Maharashtra. Now at what place do I offer the food? If I want to understand that, I should put a tag on the vulture and see where the vulture is going. If I am going for a party by Abhilash Khandekar sir at Jahanuma Palace and I land up in Arera Club and say there is a party and then who is going to give me anything? That is the kind of stuff that happens. So you put a transmitter on a vulture, you know where the vultures are going, so you know their feeding range, you know specific points where the vultures go and eat, and that is where you put the food. So that is the kind of stuff that
So
technology
how
is made
many
of.
species of birds are being ringed or fitted with transmitters?
Here, we have the permission of the Maharashtra Forest Department to ring, tag and put transmitters on birds, and that permission is for 10 years. I have been doing that for the last almost 20 years. So we have done this for at least 110 species of birds.
Oh, that is
Yes,
very.
and some data is
And
gathering
what is
now.
the scenario across the country?
Across the country, the Bombay Natural History Society has been doing this for a very, very long time. And there is a very beautiful book that has been published by them called The Atlas of Bird Migration. That is by one of the scientists who was doing this work. So, but let me, like yesterday's, but that but is that the point is that the amount of studies that are actually needed, because India is a huge country. So we have to have multiple centers, multi-centric kind of studies which have to happen, and just 1 or 2 institutes should not, limit themselves to these kinds of studies. But because these studies are difficult, and there are lots of permissions because of the Wildlife Protection Act, we have to have, because of the Forest Department is therefore naturally a little bit, on the safer side. They don't allow each Tom, Dick and Harry to go out and do this. But bird migration, if you understand the importance of bird migration,
A
because
small little question that large number of birds come from different places into India and go back.
yeah,
So for the general this thing, that what is the average distance they travel one way, and what kind of energy they store and how kind of very
Oh.
briefly. This
there
is a
are
huge topic, but-
there are these birds like the bar-tailed godwit, which starts from the North Pole and goes non-stop to New Zealand. Astounding. The Arctic tern.
Pacific golden
The
plover.
the Arctic tern, the most celebrated bird, because that start again from the North Pole, goes to the South Pole, and 3 months travel, then again 3 months there, and then 3 months travel back. So the entire life is spent traveling. The Pacific golden plover, a bird which is, this size, this big, 12 grams, non-stop from the Arctic Circle to India, amazing. And non-stop flight of 8 to 9 days. And how they do it, we have this ornithology course, and we teach this bird migration. I personally take these lectures, and one lecture goes for 6 hours, so just how they prepare for migration, how they eat, how they navigate, what are the flyways that they use, what are the risks which are there in bird migration. So these are the kinds of questions, fascinating things,
A Siberian stone chat, the size of a sparrow. It
Tiny,
comes
tiny
from
bird.
Siberia to India. Even in Bhopal, we can see that in wintering months.
And
So it's
the
amazing.
popular myth is that the larger the bird, the more energy it has to spend to migrate, because that is a very difficult process to fly. And the smaller the bird, it is better, because they store fat and they don't store carbohydrates. Because, gram per gram, fat gives 5 times more energy than carbohydrates. And carbohydrates require 5 times more amount of weight to produce that much amount of energy. So it is all that kind of stuff, So it is.
So
I
this
think we
is
can
a,
keep
this
on
is a very
talking.
vast, a very vast topic. I would have loved the organizers to give us at least 2.5 hours for this thing. But all good things have to come to an end. Let me open the floor for the questions from the audience.
Good morning.
Zara Razan non-fiction editor. Very gracefully, I met Zalim Ali when I was 16 years old. I was given a present on my wedding day from my husband, which was about books. Not a piece of jewelry, not clothes. So I'm into birds.
Yeah.
Okay. One reason that we need to understand how people are shooting with a camera rather than shooting with an air gun is because people want to shoot, they
Yeah.
want to achieve.
Yeah.
Now we have to understand the achievement is in identification. I lived in Delhi shortly for 4 years in between, and I discovered that a rock dove wanted to make a nest on my balcony. So I looked up everything about it, made sure I could feed her, made sure I watched the entire cycle, and saw her do this 3 times. I thought it was amazing. I got more involved with birds. I think one pattern that we can make birds more part of our lives as everybody is, we have an ABCD in our schools. Birds have names with ABCDs.
Yeah.
We can do
There are actually such kinds of charts already available.
No, charts are not enough. They have to be, this bird does this, lives here, eats this,
Yeah, okay,
and
that's-
have you seen it? And if you've seen it, put that in your scrapbook. These are the kinds of activities. I'm not a teacher. I will not be a teacher. But being in love with birds for so long, and I was married 37 years ago. So it is important to understand the involvement with birds is not to know all the technical
Correct, correct.
pesticides
Yes,
and the
yes.
diseases of the birds, but that they are part of our lives.
Yes.
As we can identify so many flowers,
Yeah.
but now we need to identify birds. So I would like to know what is the work and agency that you are creating from your level to bring birds to the KG and nursery level, where we don't just talk about a batak and a murga and a goraya. I can tell you a beautiful story about a goraya which will be published soon. But the point is not that what I can do. It is important that what will a 3-year-old do when they see a goraya or a maina or a tota or a kawa, or so many things are common. What about the less common? Do we know
At
about
Ila-
them?
I will take
I
this
will-
question as father of 5-year-old daughter.
yes.
So what I make sure is whenever we go out, I keep sharing names with her because I know the names. But still, in her school, there are some assignments and a lot of nature camps are being done, especially Bhopal and Indore. Nowadays, you see every weekend some or the other NGOs are organizing a lot of bird watching camps. So rather than going the school route, there are many other routes as well. Because school will go according to their syllabus and their rules. But then
No. What we are actually what we have is ILA Foundation. We have got a field station in the rural area. You know, I personally believe that most of the biodiversity that is present in India today is in our rural areas. And if we don't go ourselves to the rural areas and start talking with children, you know, because they are not in a position to come to cities. We had a Boneless eagle story. I'll just tell you a tiny anecdote. You know, a Boneless eagle is an eagle. It is a top predator. It was nesting on a cliff slope on a jamun tree, and this was about 30 feet tall. For 2 years, the chicks of the Boneless eagle used to disappear from the nest. 2 weeks old chicks, when they were not able to fly. And we were observing this. So this is a story, you know, a few years back. And then one fine day, one of my friends from Kolhapur, he told me, sir, this year also the chick has disappeared. So the same evening, I left for Kolhapur. There's a fort called Pavangad. And I went there, you know, at that time it was, I went by a scooter and it was 250 kilometers. And then we reached the fort early in the morning, you know, 5 o'clock. And when we sat there, the nest was visible from the top. It was empty. So we were sitting there, and then we were thinking, how come these things have happened? And we saw 2 boys going down the slope, and they had a bag in their hand. Then suddenly I realized that something was moving inside. So we had a suspicion. So, you know, we ran, and we, could overtake those children. They were in the 7th standard. And then I asked him, what is there in the bag? And he said, there are these babies of the, that bird. And then I said, I believe in not scolding people, you know. I try to understand. So I said, why did you do it? So he said ki there is a friend of mine who is in Kolhapur, and if I give him the babies for taming, he will give me an air gun. See, this is a vicious circle. Then I explained everything to him. See, this is a Boneless eagle which is nesting in your backyard, and this is a eagle which is, completely threatened everywhere in its distribution, but it is nesting with you, so it is your baby. So will you like, if you are taken from your mother and somebody steals you, he said, I will start crying. Then she said, see, this baby's mothers will also be crying. He said, then I will do one thing. He immediately accepted his mistake, put the babies back into the nest, and the eagles came back again and accepted it. And we have got this trilogy of podcasts of ILA Foundation. We have got a podcast, and 78 countries are listening to our podcast. So you can go to ILA Foundation website and you can listen to those podcasts. Then I asked him, so what was the turning point for me? Was when I asked him, why did you remove them in the first place? He said, nobody ever told me. And then, we have this field station. We go out to 80 schools in the rural areas and we talk to them and we ask them to plant trees, because I believe not just trying to save species, but try to save habitats. And when we went to that, Pingori village, and we gave them these school children, each child we gave one tree and said, I am going to come back again every week. I am going to monitor what is happening. And after 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years, I'll tell you, of the 1,000 trees that I have given to that Pingori village, sir, I am so happy to tell you, not one has died. And those which had died, we replaced them. And when one day, I just told about this in the TED talk. I gave a TED talk last week. I told them, when I was coming from ILA Habitat one day, and this boy, panting and saying, doctor, please wait. So I stopped my car, and this boy came on a cycle, and this was after 3 years after we had given them the trees, and he said, sir, I want to give you something. I said, what do you want to give? And he opened his, bag and gave me 3 custard apples. And he said, you have given us the trees, and the trees gave us the custard apples, and what can I give you better than the custard apples? So this is one mind change, If we can achieve change of one mind, I think the battle is won, So that is the kind of thing that we try to do. So we are talking to children. One more thing, ma'am, as Kaustubh said, we held the first ever Indian Owl Festival at ILA Habitat. It is a remote area, and we went out to about 500 schools in Maharashtra, gave them a presentation on superstitions and owls and other things about owls, and asked them to present a picture, a painting, a sculpture, a face mask, a bookmark, or whatever, We got 10,000 entries. And when we had the first Indian Owl Festival in Pingori, first year we had 5,000 students coming in. Second year there were 12,000 students who came in. And in the UPSC examination that year, there was a question saying where was the first Indian Owl Festival held. so these are the kinds of things which happen. But we have to go, I have to take an effort. So here, what I think important is taking suggestions from people, because my focus of thinking can be a very narrow focus. So we have got an open mind, invite suggestions, but implement them. I just saw a cartoon yesterday. Rodin's thinker, there's one thinker there, and the other bust, other thing, there is nothing on that platform. The thinker is there, and there are just footsteps, and they say 50 hours of thinking and 10 minutes of action. 10 minutes of action is better. I believe it in, half of it, because as I told you, the first sentence I told is no action is worth its while unless you have got a philosophical base for that. Yes.
Sir, I'm so sorry to be an interruption here, but since we're running out of time, we'll take just one more question, one last question.
This is Sanjeev.
Yeah.
I'll just come this side. Okay. This is Sanjeev from Extra Childhood. We primarily work with government school children. One of the irony is that these pigeons and the birds who helped us creating our first wireless communications have actually are being impacted because of that communication. So one interesting thing in the same continuation of what ma'am have said, so we have started a special program for government school which is called Chidiya Ud. And one thing which I have realized by working on that show, of course there is focus on birds and understanding, but I believe in something what you can contribute on is that there, like how we have curriculum for organic chemistry and physics and Hindi and English, there is a need of a curriculum on birds. At a very systematic level, if it can be introduced, it can, I think, really help the children to grow.
My suggestion is you please target the rural areas. Start targeting the rural areas. There the teachers are open, you know. They are easy to talk to. You have to win their hearts. But once that is done, you know, they will open up, they will give an access to their children and you can do these things. And we have succeeded in doing that. So, yes.
So as a last,
You wanted to
we
say
have
something?
to wind up now.
Yes, sir.
So I would like to say, Suruchi ji. Please, can we have the mic there?
नमस्ते, मैं डॉक्टर सुरुचि पांडे इला फाउंडेशन के वाइस चेयर और ट्रस्टी फाउंडर मेंबर हूँ. आई जस्ट वांट टू ऐड फ्यू पॉइंट्स टू दिस डिस्कशन. जो मैम ने बोला कि रूरल एरियाज़ में कैसे काम करना है, तो 6 महीने से मैं हमारे जो एरिया है रूरल एरिया, तो वहाँ के ऑलमोस्ट 45 to 50 बच्चों को मैं पढ़ा रही थी, क्योंकि हर वीकेंड हमारा ही सेंटर है, हमारा मेडिकल सेंटर है, वाइल्ड लाइफ ट्रीटमेंट सेंटर है, तो मैं जाती हूँ. तो मैंने देखा कि जो छोटी छोटी बस्तियाँ हैं वहाँ के बच्चे बस इधर उधर टाइम पास कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि ऑनलाइन स्कूल का बहुत सारा डिजिटल इंडिया का जोर शोर से सब लोग बात तो करते हैं, लेकिन रूरल एरियाज में जाए तो स्मार्टफोन लेने के लिए पैसे नहीं है. अगर पैसे जुटा लिए तो नेटवर्क नहीं है, तो कहाँ जाकर बच्चे पढ़ेंगे. तो मैंने सोचा कि हमारा ही सेंटर है, तो मैंने बच्चों को बस हमारे जो वहाँ के पहचान वाले हैं उनसे बोल दिया. तो 45 to 50 बच्चे वहाँ आते हैं और 10-10 किलोमीटर से साइकिल चलाते हुए, छोटे छोटे 2-3 दूसरी या तीसरी कक्षा से बच्चे आते हैं. उनको कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं होती. अगर 4 बजे बोल दिया है कि क्लास शुरू हो जाएगा तो 2:30 से ही आकर बैठते हैं. तो उनको मैं सिलेबस तो पढ़ाती हूँ, इंग्लिश पे फोकस करती हूँ, लेकिन उसके साथ साथ जो हमारा इकोलॉजी का काम चलता है उसके बारे में मैं उनको पढ़ाती रहती हूँ. तो अभी क्या हुआ कि बाहर भी अगर कोई लिफ्ट मिलती है, कोई आता जाता है, तो ये बच्चे बोल देते हैं कि हमारे एरिया में प्राणी और पक्षियों पे काम चलता है, आउल्स पे बहुत ज़्यादा काम चलता है. तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि अगर रूरल एरियाज़ के बच्चों को भी पढ़ाना है तो हर एक जो प्रादेशिक भाषा है उस पर भी कंसंट्रेट करना चाहिए, क्योंकि क्या होता है कि जिसे वो हार्ट से कनेक्ट कर सके उसी भाषा में उनको बोलना है. क्योंकि अभी क्या है कि हर जगह जैसा हमारे एरिया में भी इंग्लिश मीडियम में बच्चों को डालने का क्रेज़ बहुत होता है. तो कहने के लिए तो 2nd स्टैंडर्ड में बच्चे हैं, लेकिन ABCD कुछ नहीं आता. तो मैंने वहाँ से शुरू कर दिया. तो एक बच्चा आ गया यू तक, तो मैंने पिक्चर दिखाया, बोला कि ये क्या है, तो वो सोच में थोड़ा पड़ गया. तो मुझे तो मैं जान गई थी कि उसको अम्ब्रेला ये शब्द याद नहीं आ रहा. तो 5 मिनट रुका, मैंने बोला ये, तो बोला ये छाता है. मराठी में बोला ये छतरी है. मैंने कहा कि नहीं, लेकिन यू क्या है, तो उसको बोल दिया कि बेटा इसको अम्ब्रेला बोलते हैं. तो बोला कि हाँ ताई यानी दीदी, वो तो होगी जो आप कुछ बोल रहे हैं, लेकिन है तो छाता ही ना. तो इसीलिए मैंने कहा कि इन बच्चों को कि आपको जिस भाषा में पेपर तो लिखना है, पेपर में छाता नहीं लिख सकते, इसलिए अम्ब्रेला कहना चाहिए.
So we need to wind up and
Yes.
I'm sorry to
जी
interrupt.
जी,
and-
जो मैम बोल रही थी ना कि रूरल बच्चों के लिए एफर्ट्स क्या क्या करने होते हैं, इसलिए मैंने थोड़ा एडिशन कर दिया. थैंक यू सर
वेरी
फॉर योर
वैल्यूएबल
टाइम.
कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन, वेरी मैं
Thank
सिर्फ
you,
लास्ट
ma'am.
एक बात बताना चाह रहा हूँ कि ये दोनों जो यहाँ पर हमारे पैनलिस्ट हैं, डॉक्टर पांडे एंड कौस्तुभ, पिछले दिनों मध्य प्रदेश गवर्नमेंट ने एक छोटी सी चीज बताना चाह रहा हूँ, मैडम मीरा जी भी यहाँ पर है, कि क्या अर्बनाइजेशन के ट्रेंड्स चलते हैं, क्या होता है. उज्जैन में एक कलेक्टर साहब ने अभी पिछले 6 महीने पहले एक बर्ड टावर बना दिया, और सीमेंट कंक्रीट का बहुत बड़ा बर्ड टावर, और स्मार्ट सिटी के अंदर जमीन दे दी और पैसे डाल के बर्ड टावर, ये सोचा बर्ड, और मेरे पास फोटो आया उसका, उसके उसके 2 महीने बाद इंदौर में एक भूमि पूजन हो रहा था, अखबार में खबर छपी. सो आई टुक इट अप विद द चीफ सेक्रेटरी ऑन व्हाट्सएप. आई वाज समवेयर. मैंने उनको कहा कि साहब ये क्या हो रहा है, क्योंकि इसमें आएंगे कबूतर, इसमें क्या बहुत सारी चीजें, दिस बर्ड टावर्स में कोई पैराडाइज फ्लाई कैचर या दूसरी वो सब वो नहीं आते वहां पर. तो ये बहुत समझाना पड़ा उसमें कि कबूतर वहां पे कब्जा कर लेंगे, इट्स ए रोबस्ट बर्ड, और इसको बहुत लोग 5 रुपए में खिलाते हैं पुण्य कमाने के लिए. तो कबूतरों की संख्या पूरे शहरों में बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ रही है. So the chief secretary suggested you form a panel and we will do this thing. So they are the panel members and Gopi Sundar who is in Udaipur. ये 3 लोगों की कमेटी 7 दिन में बनवाई. उसके बाद में 15 दिन में वो इन लोगों की मीटिंग हो गई. उसके बाद मध्य प्रदेश गवर्नमेंट के अर्बन डेवलपमेंट डिपार्टमेंट ने ऑफिशियल ऑर्डर जारी कर दिया कि इस तरीके से बर्ड टावर्स विल नॉट बी बिल्ट इन मध्य प्रदेश. ये अभी 4 महीने पहले की बात थी. इतना फास्ट काम कभी मैंने सुना नहीं था. बट दे आर द मेंबर्स ऑफ दैट पैनल. सो कहने का मतलब ये है कि कहीं से कुछ आइडियाज आ जाते हैं. समबडी जस्ट टॉक्ड अबाउट कबूतर एंड दिस थिंग, इसलिए मेरे को वो याद आया, बताने की कोशिश की कि हमने इसको मतलब अब इन द नेम ऑफ बर्डिंग एंड इन द नेम ऑफ डूइंग सम पुण्य काम, एनीथिंग कैन हैपन. सो जो ये भी जरूरी है कि जो एक्सपर्ट्स हैं वो समय पर इंटरवीन करें और गलत चीजों को नहीं होने दें. सो थैंक यू वेरी मच डॉक्टर पांडे फॉर योर टाइम. थैंक यू कौस्तुभ.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for such an absolutely enriching and informative session. And now I would request Meera Das ma'am to please come forward and give the mementos to our discussants and also to our speaker. Could we have a huge round of applause for them, everyone?
I said the path to hell is paved with good intention. तो लोग अच्छा इंटेंशन करते हैं, वो रास्ता हेल का बनाते हैं.
Thank you so much, everyone.